Somebody with either an Alzheimer's or an autism family member. How many? How many? Oh my goodness, wow. Well, you know what a burden. It's a emotional, physical, financial burden. And God bless the family members, the caregivers and caretakers who are there for their children, their spouses, their parents and grandparents. But boy, is it hard. It's so hard. And that's why I've rolled out what I want to do for more research and more support, a tax credit for caretaking. I want to help families do the work that they're already doing, but which is so difficult. And today I rolled out my autism policy because the Centers on Disease Control say 1 out of 68 of our kids is on the autism spectrum. And a lot of those families are just at their wits' end trying to figure out how to get the services, to get the insurance companies to pay for the services, to figure out what to do for schooling, and then as a child becomes a young adult, what to do for housing and employment. I want to be the president who helps families in our country deal with some of those issues, because there are tens of millions of us. If we don't have Alzheimer's or autism in our family, we may have mental health problems or substance abuse problems. Those have also been ignored for too long. On my very first trip here in April, that's what I heard about, substance abuse and mental health. We need to remove once and for all the stigma on mental health. We need to get the insurance companies to pay for mental health issues just like they pay for any other issue. We need to do the same to get more treatment for substance abuse. And you know, I've got to tell you, I was appalled when last summer your governor vetoed a bipartisan bill to keep 2 of your 4 mental health facilities open. Danny represents a lot of those people who work at those facilities. Well, he went ahead and closed them despite what the Republicans and the Democrats in the legislature said. And we're now trying to track what's happened to those people. We know some of them died. We know others were put into nursing homes, which is not the appropriate place for them. So I want to be a partner as president working with not just state and local government, but nonprofit, faith-based, and other groups so we can do more to help people who are truly in need. And I also want to do everything I can working with our teachers to be a good partner to improve education in elementary and secondary school for all of our kids. And I believe we should start with early childhood education so that every child gets a chance to be successful when he or she gets to kindergarten. And I want to make college affordable for everybody again by having it possible for you to attend a 4-year public college or university without having to borrow money for tuition, debt-free tuition. I've worked out a way that we can afford this. We do need to work with the states and with the colleges and universities to get those costs down, but this is doable. Now, I differ with my 2 friends in this race on the Democratic side who are advocating for free college for everybody. I personally will not pay for Donald Trump's child to go to college. I will pay for your children and grandchildren in a way that we can afford, and I think that will help alleviate the burden on so many people. And then we've got to deal with the debt we already have. How many of you either have or have had student debt from your education? Again, lots and lots and lots of hands. Yeah, me too. I have a plan so that people can refinance their debt. If you can refinance a mortgage or refinance a car payment, you ought to be able to refinance your student debt and save young people and their families thousands of dollars. And I think we can do that, and we're going to do it in a way that takes away the incentive from the federal government to make money off of lending to students. I don't believe that should continue to happen. So if you go to my website, HillaryClinton.com, you can read about my new college compact and what I will do. And then I also have laid out my plans for dealing with terrorism, in particular ISIS, but all of the terrorist networks. I take this seriously. I've been saying for months, you can't contain them, you have to defeat them. And I've laid out a very specific set of steps I would take, starting with American air power, which we are now doing, to provide cover to fighters on the ground who are Arabs and Kurds, because I will not send American combat troops to Iraq or Syria to fight ISIS. But I will support, with special ops and air cover, the Iraqi military, Sunni fighters, and Kurdish fighters. And we're seeing some progress that they are making, and it's a very tough effort. I also will do everything I can to end the foreign funding, the foreign fighters, and the ability of ISIS and other groups to be able to dominate the internet, to recruit and radicalize people, to actually direct attacks and celebrate horrific violence. And I've asked our great tech companies to help us in this. And then I will do whatever it takes to keep us safe at home. I feel personally incredibly passionate about this because I was a senator on 9/11 for New York. And I spent much of my time in the Senate working to help the people who were directly affected, the families who lost loved ones, the 3,000 who were lost by that terrible attack in New York on the Pentagon and the plane in Pennsylvania that those brave passengers took down to avoid it going to the White House or the Capitol. So I take this very seriously. We need to have the best information sharing among law enforcement, federal, state, and local. We need to have the best intelligence we can get, including what we can get from friends and allies around the world. But I want to say this. I think it's important for us to understand that we need the full cooperation of Muslim Americans who are in the communities where those recruiters go to try to radicalize young people, mostly young men. And when the Republicans, and it's not just one of them, it's a number of them, make the kinds of offensive, derogatory comments about Muslims, and particularly about Muslim Americans, that's not only shameful, it's dangerous. Because we need people to feel like we're all in this together. You hear something, you see something suspicious, call the police, call the FBI. But if we make people feel like they're marginalized or not wanted, they're going to think twice before they do that. So I have been speaking out and will continue to speak out against what I consider to be a very wrong-headed, dangerous kind of approach from the Republicans. We want to defeat the terrorists, not alienate billions of people around the world. So let's make sure that's what we get done and do it together. Now, let me just end on this before I take your questions. You know, I have to tell you, it's important you listen to what the Republican candidates are saying, because it's been my experience they'll actually try to do what they're saying. Yeah, they will. And that's why they have to be taken seriously, despite how outlandish they sometimes behave. Because I think they really don't believe in civil rights or women's rights or gay rights or voting rights or, you know, workers' rights. They really don't believe. So I want you to know where I stand. I will defend a woman's right to choose, and I will defend Planned Parenthood against these partisan attacks that they have launched. I will defend marriage equality and fight against discrimination that persists against the LGBT community. I will defend voting rights. Now, who would have thought someone running for president in 2015 would have to say that? I thought we finished that job. But there are so many Republicans trying to turn the clock back on voting rights. And I will do whatever I can, from appointing Supreme Court justices to a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, which is a pernicious, corrupting influence on our election. I will also continue to defend Social Security against the privatization schemes that the Republicans are always pushing. I will fight against voucherizing Medicare, and I will do everything I can to fix the problems in the VA, but I will not let the Republicans privatize the VA and take away the right to treatment and care that our veterans have earned. I will continue to work toward comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship, and I will continue to stand up for unions and workers who are trying to get a better deal, a fairer deal for the working people of America. And I will continue to take on the gun lobby to try to get common sense gun safety measures. Now, I'm very proud of what the president called for this morning with his executive order, and I was pleased because some of what he called for I had advocated for back a couple of months ago during our debates and during the campaign. Comprehensive background checks, closing the gun show loophole, closing the online loophole, closing what's called the Charleston loophole, closing the kind of chances and opportunities that people who shouldn't have guns can take advantage of and get them, and that includes ending the immunity from liability for gun makers and sellers, the only industry in America that has that. I voted against that when I was in the Senate. I thought it was a mistake then. And most indefensible of all is how in the world can the Republicans defend the rights of people on the no-fly list, would-be terrorists, who are still permitted to buy guns in America? If you are too dangerous to fly, you are too dangerous to buy a gun, as far as I'm concerned. And everything I've just said is supported by a big majority of Americans and a big majority of gun owners. And I've talked to a lot of folks throughout Iowa. I was just in Osage, and a man came up and he said, look, I'm a veteran, I have guns, I like to hunt. He said, but I agree with you. We need to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. What can I do? So I'm really appealing to responsible gun owners. We can do this in accord with the Constitution. We can stand up to the existing gun lobby, and in fact, I would like to see gun owners go back to forming an organization that would compete with the NRA, to go back to the kind of safety that was done, that NRA used to really do. Because, you know, we get 90 people a day dying from gun violence, 33,000 a year, homicides, suicides, and tragic avoidable accidents. I was in Davenport, and the night before, a 2-year-old found a loaded gun. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we all need to be more responsible. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to keep standing up and fighting to keep guns out of the hands of fugitives and felons and stalkers and terrorists and people who have mental health, serious problems and the like. And I need your help to do that. Because, you know, when it comes down to it, this is really a job interview. That's what I'm doing here. I mean, the first step in the application process is the caucus on February 1st. And I'm hoping that I can get enough of you to go out to your caucuses and caucus for me, and that I can get the nomination and then begin immediately to work to win Iowa in November and be able to really get in and hit the ground running. But I need your help to do that. And I'm very convinced that our best days are ahead of us. I'm confident and optimistic about that, and I personally really don't care for the kind of negative talk we're hearing from the other side. That's not, to me, who we are as Americans. You know, we're folks who roll up our sleeves, we get to work, we solve problems together. And that's what I want to do again. I'm going to do everything in my power to create unity and to find common ground. I will go anywhere and meet with anyone to find common ground to solve our problems. I'll stand my ground, but I think we can get back to having a more civil exchange where we can try to figure out, are there areas where we can agree? And what keeps me motivated every single day is my wonderful 15-month-old granddaughter, who is the you know, just the light of our life, and we're going to have another one next summer, so that's double the fun and the pleasure. Because obviously I want the best for her, and Bill and I will do whatever we can to help her parents to make sure she has every opportunity, but that is not enough. It matters what kind of country she becomes an adult in and what kind of world is out there waiting for her. And I believe with all my heart in the promise of America. And I don't want it just for my granddaughter. I want it for your children and your grandchildren. I will get up every day in the White House doing everything I can to make sure every person in America, and particularly every child, has a chance to live up to his or her God-given potential. I hope you will join me in that mission. Thank you all very much. Time for a few questions, so please, if you sit down, raise your hand. We've got a microphone. I've got this man. I got a call on him. He has a T-shirt which says, "Bill Clinton for First Lady." You know, I'm sort of more partial to first mate or first dude, but that's okay. Here you go.
Thank you for being here, Madam Secretary. My question is, over the holidays, a documentary came out called Making a Murderer. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's about a man and his nephew who are in prison for a murder, even though there are serious questions about whether or not they were framed by local law enforcement. And it raises a bigger question about our judicial system, where we seem to railroad poor people and uneducated people into prison, even when there are serious questions about their guilt or the denial of their constitutional rights. So I guess my question is, what can we do to fix our broken judicial system in this country? And that's a cause that I know was very dear to a mutual friend of ours, Don O'Brien.
Yes, I was privileged to know Judge O'Brien, and thank you for that question. I think we do have a systemic problem in our criminal justice system, and I believe we can get bipartisan support to address it because it is now very apparent. We have a couple of big issues. One, it is true that there's enough evidence to show that if you are an African American man, you are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and incarcerated for doing the same thing as a white man. And there's just a lot of evidence of that. And of course, if you're poor, that makes it even more likely. And so I do think there's some good suggestions that are out there. The president impaneled a policing commission, which has some good ideas, because we have to restore trust between the police and the communities they serve. People have to start, you know, feeling like they can count on each other. The police have to feel that, because when they go into dangerous situations, they're on edge, understandably so. The community has to feel that because they need the police if there's something that is potentially dangerous. So we've got a lot of work to do with sort of retraining and really looking at the best police practices, learning from places that have, you know, dealt with some of these issues. The other part of the problem is the incarceration. You know, we have 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prisoners. In fact, we have 1/3 of women prisoners in the whole world are in American jails and prisons. Now, most of this is a state and local concern because that's where most of the jails and prisons are. But there are federal prisons, and so we have to take a hard look at how we reform them. And we have to ask ourselves, if someone's in prison for a nonviolent, low-level offense, is that really helping to keep us safe if that person doesn't have any other record? We have people in prison right now who are there because they can't make bail. They've never been convicted of anything, but they're stuck in jail or prison for months. So we have to take a hard look at this because obviously we have to keep ourselves safe, but I think there are ways that we can do it that are fairer and more in keeping with our own values, our Constitution, the rule of law. So I'm going to be very focused on this because I've heard too many stories from too many people that just are tragic. They're heartbreaking about the unfairness that unfortunately we have in our system. So it's a very important question. I hope you'll find a way to be part of solving those problems. Maybe, you know, follow in Judge O'Brien's footsteps. Good luck. Good. It's a good plan. Hi.
I'm wondering what you have to say about families who have chronic illnesses and mountains of debt that they incur, and it weighs them down. I know you were talking about specifically with Alzheimer's and autism, but what about, other diseases?
Well, you're right. I mean, there are so many other diseases that are, very expensive, and because they're chronic, it is something that can go on for decades or a lifetime. So I want to address this in a couple of ways. One, I really believe that we should give a tax credit for people who have these high costs that come from caring for a disease. I also want to be sure that we do more to get those costs down at the point of treatment, so that a lot of the costs are driven by really high prescription drug costs, particularly for some illnesses. In Cedar Rapids yesterday, a woman stood up and told me about her son who has type 1 diabetes, and he takes insulin 3 times a day, and the price of insulin has gone up 3 times in the last year. And, there's no excuse for that. Insulin's not a patented drug anymore. It's generically available. We're just getting ripped off by drug companies, some of which have been bought by hedge funds and other speculators, and are taking advantage of the fact that people need these drugs. We're going to come down hard on them, because we've got to get the out-of-pocket costs down, we've got to get the drug costs down, and we've got to make sure that, insurance companies aren't taking advantage of the situation that people are in. And some of the insurance policies are very burdensome. You hit your deductible, you hit your lifetime limit, and you still have a very sick person in your family. What are you supposed to do? So I know I hear this everywhere. I'm really going to focus on this, because as I try to, improve the Affordable Care Act instead of ripping it up and starting all over again, we need to address the high costs that some families have because of illness. And it's it's personal, I think, for every one of us. I bet every one of us knows somebody, either in our family or a friend, that has had exactly the problem that you're describing. And we can't go on like this. People deserve to be taken care of, to have their health care needs met without bankrupting themselves and their families. They didn't choose to get cancer. They didn't choose to, get diabetes. They didn't choose, in many instances, to get these diseases, and yet they are stuck with them. And it's the same with mental health. A lot of people don't get the health care they need for mental health. And the insurance companies just won't pay for what the best state-of-the-art treatment is. So we have to go at this, and I want to really, get the country behind me to try to get those costs down so that you can have a little more sleep at night, not worry so much about it. Thanks. Yeah, I'll come back there. Where are you? Oh, there you are, okay. That's okay. Here's a microphone so we can hear you.
We have major corporations in this country, GE, Apple, many others, that are salting money away offshore. Can't we use their patents as leverage to make them pay their taxes? Is that possible?
Yes, we can and we will.
We should suspend their patents until they pay their taxes.
You're right. American companies have, I think, a couple $1 trillion stashed overseas. Now, technically, it's on their books, but they park it somewhere that they don't want to pay their taxes. And I think we've got to reform our whole tax code, because the way it's working now, it's driving companies away, and it's driving companies to engage in all of these really gimmicky tax games that they're playing. And we've got to get a fair, consistent tax program so that corporations pay their fair share just like the wealthy. And that's what I'm going to try to do. You got it. You got it. And you made a really good point, because I just disagree with the Supreme Court on a number of things, but I really disagree on this. I do not think corporations are people. I do not think corporations should have the same rights as citizens of our country, and I sure don't think that they should be able to buy elections the way they're doing now with Citizens United and all the money they're pumping in. I don't believe they should be able to park taxes or money that should be taxed overseas. So we've got to rewrite the book on this, because over the last 3 or 4 decades, the law has changed considerably to advantage corporations over people. I don't buy that. I don't think that's right. And I don't think that's what the founders of our Constitution or other, leaders in our country going back ever envisioned. So I'm going to take them on, and I'm going to need a lot of help to get it done. But we will. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Let's see here. All right. Just a minute. Here you go.
Thank you so much for being here, Secretary Clinton. I was wondering if you could speak to what your plans are for parental leave, maternity leave.
Looks like you might need that, huh? I am all for it. It is way past time. The United States is the only advanced economy. Actually, it's only one of the few economies left in the world that doesn't have some form of paid family leave. And I'm not surprised that a young woman would ask me this, because this is the question I get from so many young women who are trying to balance family and work. And we make it just about as hard as possible. So I want 12 weeks of paid leave to be available. I want 7 days of sick leave to be available for people. And I have worked out a way to pay for it by, again, making the wealthy pay their fair share to support young people who are in the workforce. And it's not only for, having a baby or adopting a baby. It's also, for some of the issues we were just talking about, caring for a family member who has an illness or an accident. But it will be principally used by young people, young parents who want to have that time to bond with and get to know how to take care of their baby. And what we do now to young women is just so harsh. Some of them get no leave at all. And they're not eligible for family and medical leave, which my husband signed, because they don't work in a company with more than 50 people. But even if they were, they can't afford not to get paid, so they go back to work within 5-7 days. And it's really a stress. I mean, when I look and talk with young people, particularly young women, they want to help support their families, but they also want to do right by their families, and particularly their children. So I hope we can rally the country around paid leave. And I will do everything I can to make the case that the rest of the world has figured out a way to do this. California has paid family leave, paid maternity and paternity leave. And as far as I know, they're still there, and they're doing pretty well. So we should be able to do that for everybody in our country, and I'm going to really make that a high priority. So good luck to you. Yeah, gentleman in the cap right there.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. There's been a lot of conversation on global warming and all that, and it seems like it comes down to the same solutions all the time. I'm wondering how you feel about industrial hemp and all the uses that it can be used for: deforestation. It can fight with the petroleum industry, and also when you take the White House, would you consider the possibility of having Jimmy Carter and his crew of handy people come reinstall solar panels on the roof of the White House that Reagan took down?
Yes to both. Yes to both. Look, I think industrial hemp is something that we should try out. I mean, there are a lot of potential uses for it. We've got 4 states that have legalized marijuana. We've got many more that have legalized medical marijuana. And so when people think of hemp, they only think of marijuana, but there's so many other uses, as you're pointing out, that we could use hemp for. And it would be a good crop for a lot of farmers in a lot of parts of the country if it were legal and we created a market for it. So I agree with you. We ought to give it a try. I mean, I think we should experiment because we ought to see what the market is and how it would work, but I think we should try. And with respect to what you said about President Carter, aren't we thrilled that he is cancer-free and that he's doing so well? It's wonderful. And I remember very well, he did so much to try to make the White House more energy efficient, including putting some solar panels on the roof. And those were pretty primitive solar panels. That was 77, 78, right? And, President Reagan came in and they removed everything. And it just, So now, yeah, I think we should set an example, and I think it would be a good example for us. And when we were in the White House, we tried to do more energy efficiency. We tried to make some changes, but the technology is much better now, and so I would really welcome the idea of, try to set an example, be a good model, and to make a difference. Because I do want to get a lot more people looking at solar panels. I said I want to have 500 million, $500 million. Installed before the end of my first term, and enough clean energy to power every home by the end of my second term. And when I was up there in Osage, I met a farmer who said, let me tell you what we're doing. He talked about the wind turbines. He said they had the biggest solar field in the county of any place in Iowa. That's what he told me. And he said, we can do more of this. Well, I know we can. And that's why I use Iowa as an example when I travel around, because between biofuels and wind and solar, you've got a lot already going on. And so let's put it all together and make the transition and look at other sources. Okay, I got time for one more. Got time for one more, and there's too many hands, and I try to get to everybody, but it's just so hard, and I hate to have my back to somebody, so. Oh, okay, well, real quick, I'll take you, and then you all decide among yourselves who I should call it, okay? Or agree on your question, and we'll go from there. This young lady, yes. Here comes your microphone.
Can I get my picture taken with you?
Yes, you can. You come right up here. After I take this question, you'll be the first picture I take, okay? Okay. Oh, we've got a caucus going on here to determine the question. If you've never seen a caucus in action, watch these young people. Okay. Yay! So who's the spokesperson? Okay.
Hi, I'm president of Augustina's Government Club, and this is the president of Augustina's Democrat Club. We couldn't decide, so we're going to share. Okay. Okay, so I personally am a Native American in South Dakota, and I was wondering, with the famous expression, don't get sick after June on reservations, what you're going to do when you come into office for Native American reservations, because the government's not fulfilling their promise.
So now you ask your question.
Okay. My question is, I'm president of Augustina Democrats, also vice president of College of Democrats of South Dakota, and a lot of young people are enthused particularly about Bernie Sanders. That's why my question is, what do you feel is your biggest point of contrast between you and Senator Sanders?
Number one, on your question about Native Americans, I feel that we've really let down our responsibilities and our duties to Native Americans. And I think the way that we have failed in providing health care, economic development, good schooling is a real flaw. It's a terrible failure on our part. And my husband had a big convening of Indian country when he was president. President Obama has continued that. I'm going to get in. I'm going to look at everything that's been accomplished and try to figure out what more we can do to empower Indian country to be able to deal with the challenges you face. For example, there is a lot of potential wind power on reservations. We need to make it possible for tribes to have that access to the potential economic development that would come. Right now, we let tribes in many parts of the country have casinos. We ought to let them have more productive and socially useful economic activity, like being part of the clean energy revolution that can happen. So I want to look into that and make sure that we do more on economic development and fulfill the promises that were made over so many years. And with respect to my opponent, who is a friend of mine, I think I have a broader, more comprehensive set of policies about everything, including taking on Wall Street. You know, I think Bernie's giving a speech today in New York about what he wants to do to shut down the big banks in a week. Everybody who's looked at my proposals say my proposals are tougher, more effective, and more comprehensive because, yeah, I take on the banks. But remember, part of what caused the mess we had in 07 and 08 were not the big banks. It was Lehman Brothers. It was Bear Stearns. It was AIG, the giant insurance company. I want to go after everybody who poses a risk to our financial system. And a lot of the people like Barney Frank and Sherrod Brown and Paul Krugman, the economist, have all said my plan is better. But on a host of other areas, whether it's in education, in healthcare, in these problems that keep people up at night. I have a long record, and I have been on the forefront of change for decades. I'm a progressive who likes to get things done, and I will get into that White House. I don't need a tour. I know right where